Hello! I'm LegenTerry, and this is the Monster Hunter Wilds beta. It was developed and published by Capcom. Now, today I'm doing things a little bit different. I don't have a script in front of me. Normally I would spend, half a week writing this thing. I'm just gonna save that for the full release when it comes out towards the end of next February. To be honest, I've been kind of overwhelmed. I don't know if you've noticed how many big video games have come out in the last couple of weeks. There's a lot. And it's been really hard to try to get to all of them, and I've been playing like 4 different games at once. So I've got a few videos cooked up in the background. I'll be getting those out pretty soon. But I want to go ahead and get this out now since the beta is already over, and I don't want it to lose relevancy. Now, I'm going to try to give this video a little bit of structure. The beginning half is going to be sort of aimed towards newer players or people looking to dip their toes into it. And the latter half is going to be my thoughts on the finer details, the minutia, the stuff that most other people won't really touch on unless they've been playing Monster Hunter for a while. But before we really get started, I just want to give a big shout out and a thank you to everybody who has subscribed recently, everybody who jumped on my last video for Astrobot, the review. That was the highest performing video I've had on this channel with over 1,200 views, which I haven't ever had a video exceed 1,000 views, so that's awesome. For everyone else, I would love to see you guys back too. If you guys want to like the video and subscribe, that really helps me out. I'm really close to 100 subscribers, so that'd be awesome to surpass with this video. My other videos you'll find are a lot more structured, have a lot more editing to them, just all around probably a better experience, but this one, like I said, I wanted to get it out the door as fast as possible, and I wanted to get around to editing the other things I have on my plate. So anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. For those coming fresh into Monster Hunter, Monster Hunter is an action RPG with a heavy emphasis on action. The entire core of the game boils down to, guess what? Hunting monsters. So basically, you get a selection of one of 14 different extremely unique weapons. You go out, you kill a monster, you come back to town, you make armor and weapons out of it, and then you go back out and you hunt more monsters. And you sort of repeat that loop infinitely. There is a story normally. The story is not super important, so I wouldn't sweat learning anything from past games because those are not relevant. But the first thing you should know is that it revolves completely around its combat and how fun the combat is. If you've ever played like a Dark Souls game or something in that vein, it's very heavy, very intentional. Now you might have some mild success button mashing your way through a couple of fights, but eventually you're going to meet your match. The monsters will absolutely face roll anybody who does not actually know how to use their kit eventually. So I would highly recommend finding a weapon that you're comfortable with and sticking with it for a while. They actually help you out in this game a lot more than they have in the past. An NPC kind of says, do you want heavy or light weapons? Are you comfortable close up or at range? And based on your answers to those questions, they'll give you something. Now, it's not a permanent thing, so you can always go back and pick another weapon if you want to try something else, if something else looks more interesting to you. But I would definitely recommend sticking with one thing for a while. Now, this game does things a little bit differently. You actually have access to 2 different weapons during a hunt at the same time. One gets carried by your mount, which we'll talk about later, but generally, you want to learn one weapon at a time, because if you keep switching between a couple of them, you're going to get mixed up on the controls, and it's just going to be a mess. If you have a friend that plays Monster Hunter, join with them, play with them a little bit, figure out what they're doing, what you need to do, because there's a lot inside of this game that is not explained extremely well to new players. And if you don't have any friends that play, you're always going to be able to find some kind of community online. These games are absolutely massive. The beta, I think, had somewhere in the ballpark of like 600 to 700,000 concurrent players at once. So yeah, it's gonna be massive. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like to just talk about what's returned, and then what's new, and then talk about some individual things that I found. The things that have returned, they're the same 14 weapon types. You have the same basic layer of moves. I won't say the exact same set because there are a lot of new additions with this one. The same general items and materials make a return. Of course, materials are based on the certain monsters that are or are not present. Palicos are back, of course. If you've never played a Monster Hunter game, Palicos are your little sidekick buddy cats. They're bipedal. They run around the battlefield, they pick up items for you, they distract the monsters, they throw out healing items, stuff that's really generally helpful. They have their own weapons and armor sets. They're not as important as your own stuff, but they do help out. And specifically if you're into aesthetics, I think the Balahara set that was available in the beta was really funny. Your cat gets like a mech suit, and then they have their actual like little leggies flipping around out front. It's really good stuff. But something has changed with the Palicos. This time around, for some reason, they decided to give them actual voices. Normally, they just have, their little cat purrs and meows and stuff. This time around, it's kind of distracting, I'm not gonna lie. Especially if you pitch shift their voice really high or really low. It's weird. I would just give them their middle of the road voice. I wouldn't pitch shift it anywhere. And if you don't like that, just go back to the cat voice, Now, I know it wasn't as popular because it originated on the Switch and then eventually got ported to PC, but Monster Hunter Rise did exist. I will not stand for Monster Hunter Rise erasure, stop it. What it did introduce was a mount, and that mount in that game was a dog called a Palamute. You could have one dog and one cat at the same time, so a Palamute and a Palico, or two of one or two of the other. This game has a different mount called a Sacred, which is like a small bird wyvern. Now the Sacreds are very, very important. They give you a ton of quality of life features that you didn't have before. And this is kind of where we're going to get into the new stuff. So Sacreds have an auto run. Whenever you're mounted on top of a Sacred, it will automatically start running towards whatever your next objective is or whatever monster you're hunting that you have marked on the map. You can manually drive around the Sacred, but in most cases, I would say you're fine just letting it go on its own, because while it's going, you can be doing other important things, like sharpening your weapon with a whetstone if you're starting to lose sharpness, or drink a health potion, or any other number of important things that you need to do along your hunt. And something else I alluded to earlier is that they actually carry a second weapon for you now. So say that you're using a greatsword. Greatswords are big, clunky, they do severing damage. Well, if you're going up against something like a Diablos have big horns, they have really, really thick skin, you're going to be at a disadvantage using that sword unless it's a specific element type. And that's another use for it. If you don't necessarily want to carry around a second different weapon, you can carry around two of the same type of weapon. So one greatsword that's a general damage type, and another one that does ice damage. Or if you want to get super, super practical, you could carry around any weapon and then carry around a hunting horn as a backup, because hunting horns can buff everybody that's in the party, including yourself, I think for up to 3 minutes, and then you can just switch back to your main weapon and go to town. When you're in combat, you can even jump off of your Sacred to get a mounting attack, so no more looking for a ledge or waiting for the monster to go down to a lower area of the map. You can just jump off your Sacred anytime that you want to. Now, those Sacreds wouldn't be nearly as important if we didn't also have a giant map for them to run around. I don't think it's completely open world. I think there's still individual zones that you might have to traverse between, but the map that we saw in the beta was absolutely massive. It's as big or bigger than the first area that we saw in Monster Hunter World, and they do a really good job of making it feel that way too. Other players are coming in and out of your environment, so you're constantly seeing people run back and forth. It kind of has like MMO-light vibes to it, especially with the fast travel points around the map. There are other base camps that you can set up or that other people can set up, and those work as fast travel points. But monsters can eventually come along and destroy those, meaning that somebody always has to kind of go out and repair those so that everybody has access to the fast travel points. In the beta, we didn't really have access to a whole bunch of quests. You start off the game and it sort of rolls you through the tutorial area, and then it just kind of lets you free. But anytime that you go out into the open area, you can start attacking a monster, and whenever you attack it for enough time, you'll initiate a hunt. That starts a timer for, I think it was 25 minutes, and then anybody who's within the same environment, which I guess that's the same server shard, they'll be able to see that you've initiated that hunt, and they can go to Alma, who's the handler back at the base camp, or she'll also follow you out into the open area. She will tell you that these other people are on the hunts, and you can join into their hunt anytime that you want. And if you're on a server shard with very, very few people, or I think if you're playing offline, you can actually use the SOS mechanic. I don't know if that's new. I think that's returning from one of the games. I can't remember. But basically you just hold down the left bumper and down on the right stick, I think is where it's mapped to initially. And that fires off a flare, immediately starts you up with 3 additional hunters. And these hunters can be NPCs. They don't necessarily have to be other people, so you don't have to worry about griefing or anything. You can just focus on fighting the monster. I didn't really get to test this in the beta. Hopefully the NPC AI is a little smart, because it would be nice to be able to use that feature in the late game stuff. Now, when you're out in the world, the environment also has sort of these different phases. In this initial map you start in, it's sort of a big desert. and then every now and then a giant sandstorm with lightning and stuff will come in, and that will change what monsters are within the environment. So for the beta, the big monster was Raydao. Raydao is kind of your Rathalos stand-in, except he does lightning damage. He has these big horns on his head that he sort of aims towards the center and then fires off a bolt of lightning at your crew. But the environmental shift is like, it's really cool. It kind of changes the entire tone of the map. Raydao in specific though, the sound design, really good. I thought it was funny the first time I heard him flying over. I was like, what the hell is that noise? It sounds like a steel bar rolling across a cement floor. And I realized it's because he has a bunch of like ore or glass shards that tip his wings and his tail. So when he's flying through the air, it's like rattling around. It's really funny sounding, but it's also really cool because it's like what's the name of the one monster? It's kind of like basil geese when it's flying through the air. You just hear that noise and you know something bad is on its way. The Slinger is back. There's no more Clutch Claw. That is gone from, I think that was Iceborne was where it first made its appearance. But the Slinger, you load it up with ammo that you find around the map, so you can find like rocks or thorn bushes or other things to load up into it and then fire it at the monster. This is also how you use things like flash bombs or dung pods, things to effectively slow down the monster, make them run away, other things like that. But you can also use it in the environment to grab things from a distance, so now you don't have to be right over top of the item, like if there's a mushroom on the wall or something, or a bug, like a thunderbug that you need to craft materials with. You can just aim at it and then pull it in, or there's also a shortcut. I think it's like holding down the left trigger and then tapping down or up on the D-pad while you're mounted, and it'll also latch out to the item. Getting into combat, the things that are different, there's a lot here. So the first major thing is the wound system. Anytime you attack a single area of a monster, say you're attacking a leg over and over and over, if you and your crew keep doing that, eventually a wound will appear. This will be a glowing red spot. I don't believe it's visible unless you're targeting it with the left trigger, which is focus mode. We'll get to that later. But essentially, wounds are like free weak points. So instead of like a monster having a specific area on them, those are still there, but you can make your own weak point, and then you can target those weak points to eventually close the wound, and it deals a big extra bunch of damage. Now, the easiest way to close a wound is doing what's called a focus attack, and this is probably the biggest change from combat of past games. You can aim any attack, well, you can aim most attacks, by holding down the left trigger and moving around your right stick like you would in a shooting game or an FPS, and then press the right bumper on most weapons. Some weapons are a little bit more unique. You will do what's called a focus attack. This is a big, flashy sort of finisher attack. All of the different weapon types have different types of things they do, but say specifically for like the dual blades was one of my favorite ones. If you remember the dual blades from past games, they had this attack that you had to slide into. So you had to like slide down a hill and then initiate a jump, and then you could do a rolling backslash where it goes along the entire spine with both blades out. I'll probably show this on screen, but it's kind of like that one scene from Attack on Titan where Levi does that with both of his swords down, I think it was the Colossal Titan or one of those. Either way, really cool, really flashy, and now you can do this a lot more often as long as you have a team that's setting up wounds for you. Another example is the Greatsword. The Greatsword does sort of a jab into the monster, and then you sort of run along the length of it with the sword held out, and it does a bunch of ticks of damage along the way before doing sort of a big sweep that'll knock the monster off its feet. Now, again, that's a thing that all of the weapon types have the ability to do as long as you know where to initiate it and when to pull off the attack. But something that only the weapons with a block mechanic or shield can do is what's called a power clash. Once you have blocked enough attacks with whatever shield you have access to, and I think even heavy bowguns have access to this because they have the little shield on the edges of the gun, you and the monster will kind of lock heads in this power struggle. They'll like try to eat you. They'll put their mouth around your character's shield. And if you just keep on tapping the Y button, I've only managed to do this once and I didn't realize I needed to keep on tapping the Y button. You'll just sort of jab it over and over and over and over until you eventually win the clash and it knocks the monster back. Now your heavier weapons, maybe you're feeling a little bit left out, but don't worry, they also have a new mechanic called offset attacks. And offset attacks are like giant parries. When you see a monster telegraph its attack and it's coming in, you can use these, and as long as you hit it sort of at the same moment that its attack is connecting with you, it'll knock the monster back flat on its ass, and you can just wail on it. This is super satisfying to do, especially when you get that timing down. Some of the weapons make this a little bit harder to pull off because you have to initiate like a 2 or 3 hit combo before you can actually pull out an offset attack. I think the hunting horn is kind of like that, but you can also charge up most of the offset attacks, so you don't necessarily have to do it as soon as the monster pulls out their attack. You can kind of hold off and wait for it to close the distance before you hit it. And for the more agile weapons, like I mentioned dual blades earlier and the bow, they're not left out either. You can also do what are called perfect dodges now. And for weapons like the bow, this weaves into their kit very well. It's very handy. It gives you more of a reason to be closer to the monster besides just the critical distance mechanic. And it just feels so good when you know you're not getting hit by a monster coming in for a big swing. Besides being really cool looking, the perfect dodge does different things for different weapons. So again, back on the bow, whenever you initiate a perfect dodge in the middle of holding down your triggers to start firing your bow, it will actually recover your entire stamina bar. When you're using dual blades, it actually gives you an attack boost for 12 seconds, so your blades will glow blue, showing that it's still active, and you'll have a timer up in the top left corner. But generally, you want to be using perfect dodge anytime the opportunity arises, because it's better than being hit by the monster. That's kind of it for the big picture stuff. There is kind of a conversation going around about hit stun. If you don't know what hit stun is, if you've ever played a fighting game, it's where you hit somebody else, or they hit you, and it makes your character stagger for a moment and sort of wiggle back and forth before combat resumes and you can put in another input. It makes things feel like they have more impact. If you know who Masahiro Sakurai is, he talks about this pretty well in one of his videos. I don't remember which one, you'd have to dig through his entire list of videos to find it. But anybody can tell you that's played a fighting game or that's played an action game how much of a difference hit stun can make. Now this is still in beta, so things can change. I definitely think Capcom should take a second look at this, especially with the opinions on the internet of how much it feels not as great as it used to, especially with weapons like the insect glaive. It feels more like you're slicing through butter than making an impact on the monster. But like I said, things can change. It's not final. We'll see what happens. Now let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper with the weapons and the changes that were made with some of them. I played with all of them, but I'm not super familiar with the mechanics of every single one because you always sort of pick one main weapon or 2 main weapons to roll with. But these are kind of the biggest changes that I saw with some of the weapons. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the most controversial. I already mentioned it, the insect glaive. If you played World or Rise, you know that the insect glaive kind of has a reputation for being a helicopter of death. You're going to launch yourself into the air, and then you're going to use one attack to get across the monster's back, and then you're going to hit it and jump back across. I think you could do that up to 5 times and stay in the air the entire time. Well, that is now gone. You can still initiate those attacks, but there's no more bounce off the monster to start doing it again. So the identity of the weapon has kind of changed. It sort of went back to how it was when it first became available. I believe it was in Monster Hunter 4. That was when I mained the weapon. A lot of players are not happy about this, and I totally understand. It was kind of the entire reason you played Insect Glaive was to be up in the air just pulling off these cool tricks and stuff. As a consolation, they've kind of added this big flashy finisher attack, but that also comes with a caveat. And that caveat is that the control scheme is now just an absolute mess. To pull off this attack, you have to hold down, I think it's 5 different buttons at once, which is insane. You have to have like the most wacky claw grip possible to actually do this effectively. Most people would say that trying to contort your hands in this way is not fun. It just hurts your hands. It's really annoying to try to play this way. Rurkan just put out a pretty good video covering all of this, so I'm not going to go into it with detail. But yeah, Insect Glaive feels pretty much completely different, and it's going to take a lot of getting used to for old Insect Glaive players. Hammers are hilarious. They actually have a charge attack that goes beyond their charge attack now, if you can believe it. It does massive amounts of damage. It looks hilarious. You're a lot more mobile because you can zipline to the ground when you're in the middle of the charge animation. But it's still the same general gameplay loop. You want to charge up your attacks and swing towards the head or whatever breakable part of the monster that you can, and you know, it's the same stuff. All of the ranged weapons I'm not super familiar with because I don't generally like doing ammo management, but they all kind of got a big upgrade in that all of them have some sort of bar mechanic where you can build up or deplete a bar and then recover it with certain attacks. This made me a pretty big fan of the way that the bow works now. I might end up maining it along with a melee weapon this time around. It got a massive change in that you can now fire a tracing arrow, and whenever you fire the tracing arrow, you have 3 of those on the gauge. Each time that you fire one, it depletes part of your gauge. But those tracer arrows, almost said tracer rounds, they attract all of your other arrow shots to that spot on the monster. So you're not constantly having to adjust your aim. You can actually fire the tracer round at one spot and then just launch all of your other arrows towards that one area. A lot of people will probably say, well, that's not very skillful. That sounds really kind of boring, honestly. But the thing is, they're not infinite. Like I said, you have your gauge and you have to refill that gauge constantly to make use of those arrows. The tracer arrows also eventually explode, so you're going to have to refill that gauge one way or another. The easiest way is probably to get perfect dodges, which refills your stamina and it feeds into this perfect feedback loop of doing these things over and over and over. I'm not quite as familiar with the light bowgun and heavy bowgun. I know they also had some additional changes where they got their own gauges. You now have like a barrel magazine that you can attach to either weapon that changes how many times they fire per round that you fire off. So I think the heavy bowgun, you can just lay on the trigger and it will continuously fire until that gauge runs out. The light bowgun is a little bit different. It makes it like a burst fire where it fires, I can't remember if it was 3 or 5 bullets at a time. I'll have the video playing so you can see for yourself. But it definitely makes things a little bit different. Also, the ammo economy of all of the ranged weapons, as I said, is a little bit better with quality of life. You aren't crafting your standard ammo, your power ammo, or piercing ammo. You're only having to craft the more dedicated ammo, I guess I would say. Hunting horns got a really cool bit of utility. I think they're called echo bubbles. Essentially, you can have up to 3 of these big glowing spots on the ground, and each of those will resound with each note that you hit. So say you use a standard combo of like Y, 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 or triangle, 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 whatever it is for your console of choice. Each of those notes will resonate no matter where you're at on the field, as long as you're, within reasonable range, and will actually still damage the monster. And you can also still be standing inside of those pools and doing damage at the same time. And you also get, I believe it's a speed boost and an attack boost. Don't quote me on that last part. I think you definitely have a movement speed boost though. What that means for hunting horn users overall is that not only are you the supporting backbone of the team with all of your buffs, you can also just get in there and do way more damage than you used to be able to. It's really good stuff. Greatswords and switch axe, I didn't see a whole lot different besides the fact they now have access to the offset attacks to parry monsters. I believe it's a little bit easier to get to a couple of the combos with switch axes and to get into whatever their amped state is called. I'm sorry, I'm a charge blade user, so in my head, switch axe is just like kind of a weaker version of both the greatsword and the charge blade. Don't hate me for that, please. But speaking of the charge blade, the weapon that the community has kind of said is the most complicated to learn, which I don't really know if that's the case anymore. It is definitely complicated, but I think there are other rivals at this point. Insect Clave is kind of crazy to learn how to use now if you haven't been using it for the last couple of games. But I digress. The charge blade now gets overcharged files, which I think it just lets it do more damage and stay amped longer. I'm not exactly sure. I would have to play around with it a little bit more. But it feels like the axe mode isn't just a one-trick pony anymore. It doesn't feel like you're going to need to keep going for super amped element discharge as fast as possible. You can actually spend time in the axe mode to get the file explosions off and do more damage, seemingly. Super amped element discharge is still there. It's still flashy. It feels like the camera doesn't pull back as far as it used to, which makes aiming it a little bit weirder, but you also have focus mode now, so you can adjust yourself in the middle of the attack. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty much the same. The focus mode attack is really cool. You throw up the axe and you just kind of hold it there like a giant pizza cutter of death. If you like to see lots and lots of big numbers, it is still really fun. The lance got a little bit more mobility from what I remember. You can actually side hop in between your default combo. But the most important thing, I gotta not overlook this. Not only do you have your normal dash attack where you just sort of, hunker down and start charging towards the monster and do a bunch of hits in between. But now you can also hop onto your Sacred and use it like an actual jousting stick. Like, finally, it is all led up to this. But seriously, you're probably not going to get a whole bunch of use out of it. It's just really funny. It's still just the most defensive weapon in the game. If you like to be a turtle and just take every single hit that the monster can dish out, this is the weapon for you still. I really like playing the Lance with other people, but at the same time, it feels like it just has the same problem it always has, where you either have to be super, super offensive in between your blocks, or else you're not going to put out enough damage to end the hunt in time. I ran into this problem myself when I was playing with the Lance and my friend was playing with a weapon that he was super unfamiliar with, and we ended up running the clock out at, I think it was the 25-minute marker, and we were both a little bit confused. And I was like, oh, well, probably because I'm standing here doing 10 damage per poke and then backing off and holding down block for, you know, an extra half a minute. that will do it. Gun Lance felt pretty good. They changed the shelling to where you can do it a little bit more often, and it doesn't take away as much sharpness. I know that was a big issue for a while people complained about. The Focus Strike attack is pretty cool. It sees you turning the end of the Gun Lance into a drill, essentially, and sticking it into the monster, and then after a few moments, the Wormstake end comes off inside the monster and explodes, destroying the wound. I believe they also changed the core mechanic of shelling to where it scales based on your attack rather than just being a fixed value like it used to be. So that's a big upgrade for Gun Lance users. Sword and Shield, I don't have a ton to talk about. I know you can still use certain items when it's unsheathed. I've heard some people complain that you can only attack in one direction, but I don't think they realize that you can actually use focus mode to change which way you're swiping. I believe they added a couple of new attacks. One is called like the Charged Chop attack, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it's something that you want to do towards the end of your combos, but essentially your character jumps towards the monster and will do like a down thrust attack into the monster. So it's going to be really good, not just for damage, but also for building up status that requires multiple hits. And finally, we come to the longsword, probably the most used weapon in the game, the big katana that everybody knows and loves. Well, they made the longsword even easier to use now. They made the spirit gauge build a little bit faster, they made it easier to maintain those levels. You can now do a charge attack that instantly pulls out a spirit round slash as soon as you finish the animation. The Helmbreaker attack, where you fall down from above the monster and do multiple successive hits. It now has a follow-up attack, which is really cool. And when your spirit gauge is maxed out in red, you actually deal a couple of extra slashes in between your normal combos. So just all around easier to use, easier to kill things with. But yeah, those are all of the big adjustments that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure somebody on the internet has compiled a list of everything if you really want to get a little bit more familiar with the changes. But yeah, to round out my thoughts, Monster Hunter Wilds is shaping up to be a great game, just like Monster Hunter World was, just like Monster Hunter Rise was, even if less people played it by comparison. Like I said, there are definitely some changes that I would like to see and that other people would like to see with some of the hit stun stuff and some of the weird control schemes with the weapons that got changed. And even though it's just a beta, so performance is bound to change in one way or another down the road, it ran just fine on my computer. I'm running a pretty high, mid to high range build. For context, I have an NVIDIA 4700 GPU, a 12th generation i5 CPU, 64 gigabytes of RAM, and an NVMe SSD. It pretty easily handled 1440p and 1080p, but your mileage may vary. If you do have problems after you've already bought the game, go into the settings. There are about 5 billion different sliders. This is actually like the most settings I've ever seen in a video game. It's crazy. But as long as you set reasonable expectations for the way that it performs, I think you'll be okay. So yeah, the beta's over and gone. I'm sad to see it go. It's going to be a long few months waiting for it to actually come out. I've already had some friends reach out because they got excited over the beta and were like, we're going to go back to World and we're going to learn how to play again. So maybe I'll go back in with them, play around a bit. I don't know. But anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.